Every mission was a dance with death, but that one in particular, that one changed everything. I adjust my old flight jacket as the memories flow like a stormy river. Even after decades, I can smell the aviation fuel and hear the roar of the Merlin engines as if it were yesterday. My name is Bradley, a captain in the United States Army Air Force during the Second World War. I flew a P-51D Mustang that I affectionately nicknamed the Silver Lady. It was an extraordinary machine, as much a part of me as my own arms and legs. Our mission that fateful day was to escort a formation of B-17s to Berlin. It was early March 1945, and although the Luftwaffe was all but defeated, its remaining pilots were the most experienced and lethal true lone wolves desperate to protect their territory. The morning began like so many others at our airfield in East Anglia. The briefing revealed our route and the bombers' targets. Our squadron, the 357th Fighter Group, had the reputation of being one of the best in the entire 8th Air Force. It wasn't an empty title, we had the numbers to prove it. Lady was spotless that morning, her silver fuselage reflecting the rising sun. My chief mechanic, Sergeant O'Malley, was a real wizard. He knew every screw, every wire on that aircraft. "She's ready to dance, sir," he said in his characteristic Irish accent, patting the fuselage affectionately. We took off in formation at 0700 hours. For squadrons of Mustangs, 16 planes in total, climbing to meet the bombers. As we gained altitude, I could see the B-17 flying fortresses gathering above us, their silver wings shimmering against the deep blue sky. The first part of the flight was quiet, almost monotonous. We maintained our escort position, scanning the sky for enemy fighters. We crossed the English Channel, then occupied Holland, and finally entered German airspace. That's when everything changed. The radio crackled with urgent warnings. Bandits at 12 o'clock high, Me-109s, at least a dozen of them. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I pulled the power lever. The Silver Lady responded instantly, her Merlin engine roaring with renewed force. The Messerschmitts emerged from the clouds like hawks diving on their prey. They were veteran pilots, you could tell by the way they flew. They wasted no movement. Every maneuver was precise and lethal. Red 2, on your tail. My wingman's warning had barely arrived when I saw tracers whizzing past my cockpit. Instinctively, I rolled to the right and pulled the stick, executing a sharp turn that caused my vision to darken momentarily due to the G-force. The combat turned into a chaotic maelstrom of metal and fire. The B-17s continued forward, while we, their guardians, engaged in deadly duels with the German defenders. The sky was full of planes performing impossible maneuvers, condensation trails, tracing complex patterns in the thin air. I found myself chasing a particularly skilled Me-109. His plane had a distinctive yellow tail, the mark of an experienced ace. He dived, climbed, rolled, trying to get rid of me, but the Silver Lady was glued to him. It was as if she could predict his movements, as if we were connected in a deadly dance. Aerial combat is a unique blend of science and art, where physics and instinct merge. You have to think in 3 dimensions, calculate speeds, angles, and deflection, all while your body is subjected to forces that defy human nature. I finally got a firing position. The Me-109 was about 300 meters ahead of me, trying to escape with a series of evasive maneuvers. I pressed the trigger of my 6.50 machine guns and saw my tracers converge on the fuselage of the German fighter. It was a moment I would never forget, not because of the victory, but because of the sudden realization that, on the other side of that crosshair, there was another human being. A pilot as dedicated as me, fighting for his country, for his beliefs. But war is war, and at that moment, it was him or me. The fight went on for what seemed like an eternity, but probably lasted no more than 20 minutes. When it finally ended, the sky was emptier. Some of our planes wouldn't be returning home that night, as would several of the Messerschmitts. We regrouped with the bombers, our fuel tanks dangerously low. We still had to escort them back through enemy territory. And as we flew back to England, one thing was clear. That day was far from over, and more challenges awaited us on the horizon. The air combat was only the beginning of that fateful day. As we returned to formation with the bombers, I noticed that my fuel gauge was showing worryingly low levels. The evasive maneuvers had consumed more than anticipated. Silver Lady and I still had a long journey ahead of us. Red Leader to all elements, regroup and save fuel, I ordered over the radio. My voice was calm, but inside adrenaline was still running high. The previous battle had cost us 3 Mustangs, and the remaining pilots were as exhausted as I was. It was then that we spotted the second wave. Dark dots on the horizon, rapidly growing Focke-Wulf 190s, more modern and deadlier than the Me-109s we had faced. There were at least 8 of them, diving out of the clouds like eagles. We can't let them catch up with the bombers, I thought, pulling the power lever again. The Silver Lady responded with a deep roar from her Merlin engine. Even with little fuel, we had no choice. Those B-17s carried crews of 10 men each, and they were our responsibility. The leader of the FW-190s was exceptional. His aircraft had distinctive markings on the fuselage of a seasoned veteran. He led his formation in a coordinated attack, targeting the most vulnerable bombers in the formation. Red 3 and 4, protect the right flank. Red 2 with me. The orders flowed automatically, years of training and combat experience guiding my decisions. We rolled our Mustangs into intercept, cutting off the German fighters. The sky exploded into chaos again. The FW-190s were more agile than the Me-109s, and their pilots knew exactly how to exploit this advantage. I dived after one of them, only to become the target of another. It was a deadly game of three-dimensional cat and mouse. My wingman, Johnny Lucky Morrison, proved his worth time and time again in those crucial minutes. We covered each other's backs in a synchronized dance of defensive maneuvers and opportunistic attacks. The .50 caliber machine guns of our aircraft sang a lethal symphony. "Look out, boss!" Morrison's voice cut through the air as tracers passed dangerously close to my cockpit. I executed a quick roll followed by a vertical climb, feeling the G-suit press against my body as gravity tried to rip my consciousness away. The combat was taking place at different levels of altitude. Above, the B-17s continued their relentless course towards the objective, their machine gun turrets providing additional cover. Below, individual duels developed with increasingly risky maneuvers. It was during one of these maneuvers that I saw something that chilled my blood. An FW-190 had managed to penetrate our defense and was perfectly positioned for an attack on one of the bombers. Without a second thought, I abandoned my current pursuit and dived towards it. The Silver Lady responded as always, faithfully and accurately. We reached a dangerous speed on the descent, the sound of the air against the fuselage turning into a deafening howl. My sights were fixed on the German fighter, which was so focused on its target that it didn't notice me approaching. The machine guns roared, and I saw my tracers find their target. The FW-190 shuddered under the impact, black smoke billowing from its engine. The pilot immediately abandoned his attack, diving to escape. I didn't pursue him. There were other, more pressing targets. But our victory had come at a price. The fuel gauge was now dangerously close to empty, and we were still over enemy territory. The bombers had completed their mission and were beginning their return, but the way back would be just as dangerous. Red Leader to all elements, fuel status. I called over the radio. The replies came in succession, all equally worrying. We would have to manage every drop of fuel with absolute precision if we were to make it back to base. The sun was beginning to lower on the horizon, casting golden shadows over the Silver Lady's wings. The fighting had subsided, but tension remained high. Every cloud could hide a new threat. Every moment of calm could be interrupted by a surprise attack. I kept my eyes constantly on the move, scanning the sky for threats while obsessively monitoring the instruments. The weight of responsibility for my men and the bombers we were escorting weighed on my shoulders like lead. The coast of occupied France finally appeared on the horizon, but our ordeal was far from over. With fuel at its limit and exhaustion beginning to take its toll, we still had to cross the English Channel, a stretch of icy water that had swallowed countless airmen during the war. Morrison was now flying closer, his presence a silent source of comfort. We had survived another day of combat, But the setting sun reminded us that the night would bring its own challenges. And as the Silver Lady cut through the air towards the relative safety of the channel, I knew that this mission still had surprises in store for us. The English Channel stretched out below us like a dark and threatening cloak. With fuel critical, every nautical mile was a battle against time. Silver Lady, my faithful companion, was beginning to show signs of fatigue after the intense combat. Red 2, keep close formation, I instructed Morrison while adjusting the engine mixture to save precious fuel. The setting sun cast long shadows on the clouds, transforming the sky into a surreal canvas of colors. It was then that we spotted the wreckage. IB-17 had fallen into the channel, its wreckage still visible on the surface of the water. Next to it, an orange lifeboat was bobbing in the waves. My heart squeezed. That could be the difference between life and death for the crew. Base, Red Leader. We've spotted survivors at the coordinates. I transmitted the position as we circled the area. We couldn't land to help. Our Mustangs weren't amphibious, and our own fuel would barely get us home. Morrison signaled something with his wing. On the horizon, a dark spot was getting closer to trouble. A formation of Me-262s, the new German jets, was intersecting. They were faster than anything we had in the air, and we were practically out of fuel. All elements, disperse and maintain altitude, I ordered, knowing that our only chance was to use our experience against the technological superiority of the jets. The Me-262s were fast, but less maneuverable than our Mustangs. The first attack came like lightning. The jets flew past us at an impressive speed, their 30mm cannon bursts cutting through the air where we had been seconds before. But their speed was also their weakness. They couldn't make sharp turns without losing energy. Now, I shouted as the jets flew past, initiating a series of defensive maneuvers that we had perfected in countless battles. The Silver Lady responded as always, turning and diving with deadly precision. One of the Me-262s made the mistake we'd been waiting for when it tried to engage in maneuvering combat with us. He was a young pilot, probably inexperienced with the new equipment. I seized the opportunity, moving my Mustang into a firing position. The .50 machine guns roared one last time, and I saw my tracers find the jet's right engine. The German pilot managed to eject before his aircraft plunged into the waters of the channel. One more life spared, one more ghost to haunt my dreams. Morrison had been involved in his own duel, keeping two Me-262s busy with brilliant defensive maneuvers. His skill as a pilot never failed to impress me, even with all the weight of previous missions. He flew as if the Silver Lady were a natural extension of his body. The fight dragged on for precious minutes, consuming what little fuel we had left. The jets finally withdrew, probably also limited by fuel. But our situation was critical, with the gauges showing less than 15 minutes of flight time. The English coast was still at least 20 minutes away. Red Leader to all elements, report status. I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. The answers came in succession. Everyone was at their limit, some with even less fuel than me. That's when I made a decision that could cost us our lives. All elements, reduce altitude to 1,000 feet. We'll glide part of the way if necessary. It was risky flying so low over the channel, but every foot of altitude could be converted into vital distance. The tension was palpable as the minutes dragged by. The Silver Lady's engine began to fail, coughing as the last drops of fuel were consumed. Morrison was beside me, his Mustang equally close to the limit. The English coast finally appeared on the horizon, but it seemed impossibly far away. The sun had completely set now, and darkness was beginning to engulf the sky. Flying without an engine at night over the channel was a nightmare no pilot wanted to face. Base, Red Leader. Request runway lighting and emergency teams on standby. I transmitted, knowing it would be a risky landing for all of us. The reply came promptly, along with information on winds and runway conditions. The silence of the dead engine was deafening. The Silver Lady was now a heavy glider, constantly losing altitude while I mentally calculated our approach path. Every second was precious, every decision potentially fatal. The silence of the Silver Lady's engine was like a knife in my heart as we glided over the English Channel. The growing darkness and the penetrating cold made our situation even more desperate. Morrison remained by my side, his constant presence a silent reminder that I was not alone in this ordeal. Base, set the runway lights to maximum intensity. I ordered over the radio, my voice calmer than I felt. The fuel gauge had completely stopped at the empty mark, and every meter of altitude lost was precious to our survival. Below us, the black channel looked like an abyss ready to swallow us up. Other pilots had disappeared into these icy waters, their bodies never found. We would not allow this to be our fate. The Silver Lady may have run out of fuel, but she still responded to commands as faithfully as ever. Red 2 to Red Leader, my engine has just stopped. Morrison's voice sounded tense over the radio. I looked at his aircraft. He was maintaining admirable control, but his altitude was falling faster than mine. Keep the nose slightly elevated, Morrison. Use every inch of lift, I instructed, remembering the lessons on gliding that had seemed so theoretical during training. Now they were our only hope of survival. The lights of the English coast began to appear, small golden dots that marked the difference between salvation and disaster. Our base was among them, somewhere. The challenge would be to reach it with the altitude we had left. I kept my eyes switching between the instruments and the increasingly dark horizon. Speed was critical. Too fast would waste precious altitude. Too slow, and we'd lose lift. It was a delicate dance with the physics of flight, where every mistake could be fatal. Attention all units, priority for emergency landing, I heard the control tower announce. At least 3 of our Mustangs were in the same situation, gliding over the channel with dead engines. The coast finally passed under our wings, but there was no time for relief. The runway was still miles away, and our altitude was constantly decreasing. Every movement of the stick had to be precise, every decision calculated. Morrison, prepare for an emergency landing in an open field if necessary, I instructed, noticing that his altitude was more critical than mine. Don't risk getting to base if you're not sure. Roger that, boss, he replied, his voice firm despite the situation. That's why Morrison was my cold-blooded wingman under pressure. The lights of the runway finally appeared ahead, a beacon of hope in the growing darkness. But it was still far away, terribly far away. Every meter of altitude lost was like a countdown to disaster. Base, request guidance for silent approach, I asked, knowing that without an engine, we wouldn't have a second chance. The reply was clear, with information on winds and runway conditions. That's when I noticed something alarming. The oil temperature was rising rapidly. Even with the engine stopped, it was a sign that something was very wrong with the Silver Lady systems. The previous fight must have caused more damage than I imagined. Red 2, take a lead. Your angle is better, I instructed Morrison, realizing that he had a better chance of reaching the runway. He hesitated for a moment, but followed the order, sliding ahead of me. The last few kilometers were an eternity of calculations and adjustments. Every gust of wind threatened to divert our carefully planned trajectory. Sweat dripped from under my oxygen mask, despite the biting cold. Morrison managed a perfect landing, his aircraft gliding down the runway with the grace of a bird. Now was my turn, but the Silver Lady was behaving differently. Heavier, less responsive. Base, prepare rescue team, I transmitted, knowing that the next actions would define whether I would walk home or be pulled from the wreckage. The runway was fast approaching, too big and too small at the same time. The initial touch was harder than planned, the Silver Lady protesting with a metallic groan I'd never heard before. The main wheels hit the asphalt, and for a terrifying moment, I thought we would lose control. But she held on tight, gliding down the track as I wrestled with the controls to keep her in line. When we finally stopped, the silence was deafening. I was alive, but the Silver Lady was injured, perhaps mortally. As the emergency vehicles approached with their lights flashing, I couldn't help thinking about how many more missions like this we would have to face before this war was over. Combat in the skies was only part of the battle sometimes. The real fight was against ourselves, against the fear and exhaustion that threatened to consume us. While the doctors examined the superficial injuries I had sustained during the forced landing, My mind wandered to the Silver Lady, my faithful companion, who now rested damaged at the end of the runway. Sergeant O'Malley was already there, assessing the damage with an expression that told me everything I needed to know. "Captain Bradley, you need to rest," the doctor insisted, but rest was impossible. The images of the day still revolved in my mind like an endless movie. The fighting, the German pilots, the B-17 down in the channel, the faces of the men who didn't return. Morrison appeared in the infirmary, still wearing his flight suit. "The preliminary reports are in, boss. We shot down 7 confirmed enemy aircraft today. 3 Me-109s, 2 FW-190s, and 2 Me-262s. His voice carried a mixture of pride and regret. Each victory also meant a life lost. "What about our losses?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Morrison hesitated before replying. "From Mustangs didn't return. Wilson, Henderson, Mackenzie, and Parker. Names that would join the long list of friends we had lost in this war." I got up from the stretcher, ignoring the doctor's protests. I needed to see the Silver Lady to assess the damage myself. The walk to the end of the runway seemed endless. O'Malley was on his knees, examining the fuselage with a flashlight. "It's bad, sir," he said bluntly. "The landing gear is compromised, there's structural damage to the right wing, and the hydraulics are leaking at 3 different points." He paused, choosing his words. "You'll need at least 2 weeks in the hangar." 2 weeks? In normal times, that would be an eternity. But now, with the war reaching its decisive moments, every day out of combat weighed like lead on my conscience. Other pilots would have to cover our missions, risk their lives in our place. "Do what you can, O'Malley," I said, running my hand over the still warm fuselage of the Silver Lady. Under the light of the searchlights, I could see the battle marks, small holes from projectiles, dented panels, the scars of a war that seemed to have no end. The post-mission briefing was brief and somber. The group commander praised our performance, highlighted the strategic importance of the bombers we had protected, but the empty chairs in the room shouted louder than any words of comfort. I returned to my quarters late at night, but sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the yellow-tailed Me-109, the pilot of the FW-190 ejecting over the channel, the wreckage of the B-17 floating in the dark waters. How many of those men had survived? How many had joined the endless list of missing in action? Morrison knocked on my door before dawn. "New briefing in an hour, boss. They're assigning us reserve Mustangs for today's mission." His voice was tired but determined. War waited for no one. In the hangar, I looked at the P-51 that had been assigned to me. It was a competent aircraft, but it wasn't the Silver Lady. I didn't know its quirks, its peculiarities, the unique way it responded to the controls. It would be like dancing with an unknown partner in the middle of a storm of bullets. "Keep her flying straight and level for a few miles before going into combat," advised O'Malley, sensing my apprehension. "She's a bit more sensitive on the right aileron, but she responds well at high speeds." As we prepared for the new mission, I couldn't help thinking about the pilots who hadn't returned. Wilson, with his endless stories about his family's ranch in Texas. Henderson, newly married, always showing off a photo of his young wife. Mackenzie and Parker, both still so young, with so much ahead of them. The war had transformed us into something different. We were no longer just pilots, we were survivors, carrying the weight of the memories of those we had lost. Every takeoff was a dance with fate, every combat a Russian roulette in the skies of Europe. The sun was beginning to rise when we climbed into the cockpits of our replacement planes. Morrison took up his usual position on my wing, his constant presence a reminder that despite all the losses, we still had each other to tell. "Red leader, cleared for takeoff," the tower's voice cut through the morning silence. As I sped down the runway, one last look at the damaged Silver Lady reminded me that in war, as in life, some scars never completely disappear. "Silver Lady, my old friend," I whispered, running my hand over the damaged fuselage of my aircraft as O'Malley and his team worked tirelessly on the repairs. 3 weeks had passed since our forced landing, and every day away from combat weighed heavily on my conscience. The temporary replacement they assigned me never came close to being what the Silver Lady represented. On every mission, I felt like a stranger in the skies I knew so well before. Morrison sensed my discomfort, standing even closer during formations. "She'll be ready for tomorrow, sir," announced O'Malley, wiping grease from his hands. "We've made changes to the hydraulics and reinforced the wing structure. It's even better than before." His pride was evident, as were the deep circles under his eyes from sleepless nights. The war was changing. Intelligence reports indicated that the Luftwaffe was all but defeated, but the pilots who still held out were the most dangerous, desperate veterans who fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. The next morning, as I prepared for my first return mission with the Silver Lady, the briefing brought disturbing news. One last German offensive was underway, with the remnants of their air forces focused on protecting Berlin. "It will be one of the largest bomber formations ever sent," explained a colonel, "and we'll need all the cover we can get." His eyes met mine. "Captain Bradley, your experience will be vital on this mission." As I walked towards the Silver Lady, I realized that something was different. O'Malley had painted a small symbol under my name on the fuselage, a phoenix rising from the flames. "To remind us that we always come back stronger," he explained with a discreet smile. Takeoff was like coming home. Every vibration, every response to the controls was familiar, comforting. Morrison took up his usual position, and together we climbed to meet the massive formation of B-17s that darkened the morning sky. "Red leader to all elements, stay alert," I instructed as we crossed the channel. "They'll come with everything today." The silence that followed was heavy with the realization of what awaited us. We didn't have to wait long. Over German territory, the sky exploded with activity. Me-262s, FW-190s, and Me-109s attacked in coordinated waves. It was as if the entire remaining Luftwaffe had gathered for one last decisive battle. The Silver Lady responded magnificently, her improvements evident in the way she cut through the air. Amid the chaos of combat, I found myself once again dueling with a yellow-tailed Me-109, perhaps the same pilot from the previous encounter. "Boss, you're 3 o'clock," warned Morrison. A pair of Me-262s were diving towards us. I pulled the Silver Lady into a vertical climb, feeling the G-force squeeze my body against the seat. The jets whizzed past, unable to keep up with the maneuver. The combat intensified as we approached Berlin. The sky was full of streaks, condensation trails, and explosions. Every second demanded decisions that meant the difference between life and death. It was then that I saw something that chilled my blood. Morrison had been hit. Black smoke billowed from his engine, but he maintained control of the aircraft. "Red 2, status?" I called, my voice tense. "I can keep it in the air, boss," he replied, his voice calm despite the situation. "But I need to get back to base." I hesitated for a moment, torn between my duty to the mission and my loyalty to my wingman. "Go," I finally ordered. "I'll cover your retreat." As Morrison began his return, I dived against 2 FW-190s that were trying to intercept him. The Silver Lady's machine guns roared, keeping the German fighters at bay. The rest of the mission was a blur of maneuvers, gunfire, and adrenaline. The bombers completed their objective, turning Berlin's last industrial centers into smoking ruins. When we finally turned for home, the sun was beginning to set. Morrison had managed to land safely, I found out later. But that day marked a change. The war was coming to an end. We could feel it in the air. The Luftwaffe we faced on that mission was the last gasp of a once fearsome force. Sitting in the officers' club that night, looking at the exhausted faces around me, I realized that each of us carried invisible scars from this war. It wasn't just the physical marks, but the memories of lost friends, of desperate fighting, of the impossible decisions we had to make. The Silver Lady and I carried out a few more missions before the official end of the war in Europe. Each flight felt more like an act of vigilance than combat. The sky that had once been teeming with enemy activity was now strangely empty. When we finally landed for the last time, there was no celebration, just a respectful silence. O'Malley was waiting on the tarmac, as usual. "She served well, sir," he said, his voice breaking. Yes, she served well. The Silver Lady, like all of us, had given everything for victory. The scars on her fuselage told stories of courage, sacrifice, and determination that I hope will never be forgotten. And now, decades later, when I look up at the sky on clear days, I can still hear the distant roar of Merlin engines and see trails of condensation drawing patterns in the clouds. The war may be over, but its lessons and memories will live on forever in the hearts of those who flew through the storm.